This is Who Makes a Podcast? Conversations with your favorite podcast hosts about who they are, the shows they make, and why they make them. I'm your host, Chris Cookley, and my guest today is Andrew Scott. With over 30 years' experience, Andrew is a self-proclaimed multimedia nerd, content creator, professional voice actor, and producer and host of the Keep Your Hat On podcast. He's also author of the new book, The Quick and Dirty Guide to the Home Voiceover Industry. Andrew and I talk about his podcast, how he makes it, along with three of his good friends, what it means to have started a podcast in the middle of a global pandemic, and how it has helped him stay connected in a meaningful way. Andrew has a ton of knowledge that he shares freely in this episode, and I'm very excited for you to hear it. But before we do, if you've been thinking about starting a podcast of your own, or maybe you have recently started a podcast, I have a gift for you. I want you to have my podcast quick start checklist. There are a ton of decisions that you need to make when you're making your first podcast. From what microphone and recording software you should use to how you host and distribute your show, it can be overwhelming. But I'm here to help. My podcast quick start checklist will walk you through all of those initial decisions to help you get started well. I'll show you what's actually important when you're starting your podcast. To get my podcast quick start checklist, go to whomakesapodcast.com/start and tell me where to send it. It'll be in your inbox in minutes. That's whomakesapodcast.com/start. And now, here is my conversation with Andrew Scott. Andrew, welcome to Who Makes a Podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about your podcast, about yourself as well. We connected on Reddit initially. You reached out to me. We had kind of gone back and forth a little bit on another post that somebody had put up, and then you reached out to me. I'm a little bit familiar with you and with your podcast after that fact. I listened to a number of episodes. But, for myself and then for my listeners who don't know you, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and where you're from and where you live now and how you got there?
Yeah, sure. I am Andrew Scott. Full name is Andrew Scott Montgomery. My trade name, if we're going to call it that, is Andrew Scott. And as you said, I'm a media producer. I originally hail from southeastern Wisconsin, just north of Milwaukee. And I am really, in the last 7 or 8 years, kind of reinvented myself. I have been everything from a machinist to a millwright to a DJ, club DJ, and second engineer in studios, and a musician. I have had a long life of tiny careers that I've tended to be able to string together into something that actually kept my boat afloat. But as far as media production goes, I run a small consultancy. It's myself and my partner. And as you said, I do professional audiobook narration, professional voiceovers. I do work on a number of YouTube channels, including Board Film is my big one. So if you are into fighting, martial arts, MMA, boxing, football, a little bit of basketball, Board Film does that. And I've been the voice of Board Film for a little bit over 2 years now. And the podcast is, as you said, Keep Your Hat On. It's a general interest show. It's me and 3 of my good close friends, just trying to give people a place to come and decompress and listen to some talk that is compelling and interesting and funny and serious when it needs to be. But we're trying to be an oasis in a desert full of nasty things these days, and we're just trying to give people a place to come hang out and enjoy themselves.
So you do professional voiceover work. How did you get into that? Is that something that has been on your list of things as far as your mini careers go for a long time, or is that one of the I've reinvented myself things?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because it winds up being a bit of both. I started out my audio my professional audio career. I was a home recordist back in the late 80s and early 90s. I was a rock and roll musician and a rock DJ and a club DJ. And so I'd always been dabbling with recording myself or recording me and my friends. And one of the things that we used to do back when we were building our first studio in one of my buddy's parents' basements, when we didn't have anything to do, we just started recording fake like radio call-in shows and trying to emulate stingers and bumpers and station IDs from radio stations because it was a thing that we could record and we were all familiar with it. And I wound up being the guy that was always on mic, being the host or the announcer. And this goes back to, I was raised on radio. Radio was my first love. And listening to a small plastic transistor radio stuffed under my pillow, and listening to overnight DJs at the time when the classic idea of the 70s FM DJ was still a thing, where anybody could play what they wanted, album sides, deep cuts, things like that. And listening to the announcer and the announcer patter and the talk that you would get, particularly on the late night shows where the DJ had a lot more room. And I became fascinated with this idea of being an announcer. You know, anytime I heard a station ID, I would think there's somebody out there doing that, being paid to do that. And I kind of wanted to be that. And so as time went on and my careers changed, I was a web developer. That's what brought me out to the West Coast at the Millennium. It wound up being that I always still loved audio, and I always did audio as a hobby. But really what was kind of messing with me was the technology. Hard disks weren't fast enough to record really good audio. And, you know, back at the Millennium, a microphone then cost a lot more than a good microphone does now. So there were a lot of things that were in my way.
Yeah.
And for your audience, I have a disability. I broke my neck when I was 15 years old, and I have some resultant paralysis. So my career options are a little bit more limited than other people's are. And I had been doing work for a long time, for about 4 years, in telemarketing for arts nonprofits here. I live in Portland, Oregon. And I was working for a number of arts nonprofits, and I wound up losing one of those jobs. And I finally went, you know, I'm in my mid-40s, and I want to find something that I can do that I'm passionate about, that I find interesting, that I find rewarding personally and financially, you know, but I wanted to find something that I could do on my own and not be dependent on getting to an office or listening to a boss. The typical motivations why people want to be independent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Independently employed, you know?
It's relatable.
Yeah, and I always wanted to do voiceovers. And anytime I ever brought it up to a partner or a spouse or anybody in my life, they would always kind of go, yeah, right. And that's not a thing. And the classic, why don't you just get a real job? And I finally got pushed to the wall when I lost this job, and I went, you know what? Nobody else believes that I can do this, but I do. And I'd like to listen to myself for once. And so I just threw down. I literally had a beat up old MacBook that the keyboard didn't work. The trackpad didn't work anymore. I had to use an external keyboard and an external mouse. I went out and I got myself a used Blue Snowball condenser mic for $20 off of Craigslist. Okay. And I went, I got nothing better to do with my time right now. I have a disused room in my basement. I'm just going to throw down and try this. And I'd done a little bit of it back in the day when I was a DJ. I had friends who were radio DJs in the Midwest, and I did get on mic and I did do a couple spots. They didn't really go anywhere, but I knew I could do the thing. I knew I could get in front of a mic and deliver copy and put some intonation in it. And when that time came and I lost that job, I was like, I'm just going to try it. The worst that's going to happen is nothing. And I'm okay with nothing happening, and then I'll go out and get another job again. So with the severance money that I got from my position, I bought a bunch of mattress toppers and some, sound equipment that almost worked. And within 2 weeks, I had done a spot, national PSA for a large governmental agency.
Wow.
I got the job off of Craigslist. Somebody put up a call for it. Yeah.
On Craigslist.
For the first 2 years of my career, minus one job, all my work came through Craigslist. People would put up talent calls and I would send them an audition file and I started getting hired.
That is not where I would have expected that to have started.
It's not what most people would have expected.
Yeah.
But yeah, Craigslist for a long time was quite a place to go and get voice work. It's not that much anymore with the rise of new independent gig worker sites like Upwork and a bunch of others, Fiverr, things like that.
Yeah.
You wind up getting most of it there, but it still happens, and I still get the occasional job or two from Craigslist. But honestly, the first 2 years of my career in voiceover was powered by Craigslist, either by way of jobs that I would get or gear that I would have to buy, and I couldn't afford the new one, so I'd wait until I spotted a used one and go get that. And that's really where my voiceover career started and grew from, was just this, I want to try, and there's no harm in trying.
Yeah.
And, I wound up proving everybody who told me I couldn't do this wrong, and there's some great satisfaction and gratification that comes from that.
Yeah, and you've taken this now to the point where you've actually written a book about it called the Quick and Dirty Guide to the Home Voiceover Industry.
I have, yeah.
When did you write that? Why did you write it? And who did you write it for?
Well, first off, thanks, pandemic, for giving me the time to sit down and write a book. That's no small part of where it actually came from. I had initially started writing a version of this book back in 2016-17, I think it was. And I got too busy with my own business and wound up kind of just shelving it. And when the pandemic hit, after the first 3 months, I think it was probably February of 20, I went, you know what? I got to do this. This is in me, and I got to get it out. I have a lot of writing in my background. I have a minor in writing and literature. And so I've been a writer as long as I've been almost anything else in my life. And I am one of those people that believes write what you know. And what I was really steeped in at the time was voice work, and not only voice work, but specifically independent voice work, which is now a huge multi-million-dollar a year industry. There are many people like me who are making either a small living or a large living from doing professional voiceover work from home. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that technology has gotten better. It's not only financially possible, but completely and utterly technologically possible to record broadcast quality audio from your home.
It's vastly more approachable than it used to be.
Oh, absolutely. And that's really, the approachability is one of the main reasons why I wrote the book. There's a ton of space in this industry for people to work at some level. And really what gets in people's way are simple things, simple questions that could be answered if somebody simply took the time to do it. And I'm kind of by design a teacher and an instructor. I did so when I was in industry. I did so when I was in technology. I was always the trainer. And really, this industry is the industry I know best. And so why not teach people how to take a stab at it?
So what's in the book? Is it more of a technical how-to, or is it kind of a you can do it and I believe in you because I've done it, or what kind of a book is it?
It's more the latter, but really how I explain the book to people is that this is not a how-to book, it's a should-I book.
Okay.
Because there's a misconception that this is easy work. Now, I'm not carrying barbells to the attic or, pulling a raccoon out of somebody's chimney. So it's not hard work in that way. But it is a very intensive hustle that you have to do in order to make a living from this. And, my living is small. I'm not rich by any stretch of the imagination. As I say in the book, I drive a beat-up 94 Ford Ranger pickup with a cracked windshield, but it's licensed, titled, and insured, and that's paid for by voiceover money. I wanted to take an opportunity to explain to people how I got in and the barriers that I found and overcame. And really, more than anything, I wanted to give people kind of a one sheet on, so you want to be a butcher, like we used to get when we were in like middle school and you were dealing with a career counselor. And they would give you the little test, and then they would find out what you're interested in, and then you'd get this. So you want to be a carpenter. This is what a carpenter does, and this is some of the tools they use, and this is how they go about getting into their career.
Or more often than not, you cannot be a carpenter because you didn't answer these 3 questions correctly.
Yeah, that could also be the case too. You're right. And what I wound up doing by way of approach is a general overview. The way I explain it in the book is I'm going to draw a generally detailed picture, but you're going to be the one coloring in the lines. You're going to choose the color, the shade, the intensity. I'm just putting those lines there so that you have some form. And the rest is up to you, because that's the thing that, and again, you and I first connected on Reddit, and I'm a pretty major presence on Reddit in a lot of the audiobook and podcasting and voiceover groups. And I answer a lot of basic questions because I feel that people often don't start simply by fear of their first step being a mistake.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, and my thing is, the slogan of my life is sin boldly. Just do the thing. Try the thing. If nobody's going to wind up bloody at the end, and you're not going to lose your shirt financially, which is a possibility in voiceover work, if the barriers to entry are low but surpassable, just try it. Try it and do the thing, because that's what's going to tell you whether or not this is for you. And that's the approach of the book. Was the first part of the book is really an overview of the voiceover industry and its history, and a bit of a memoir treatment of how I got in, because I'm a learner by way of storytelling. I like people giving me some background, because when you stall out personally, yourself and your approach, when you stall out, if you've got a model of somebody else who made it through, that tends to inspire me in the way of, as you said when we were leading into this, I did it. You can too, or not. But I don't want your not being able to do it be a result of lack of knowledge or lack of guidance. You have those two things, generally speaking, most people are going to get some traction. There's a lot more room in this industry for people than it being exclusive.
How does the book tie in with a VO booth camp? What is that, and how are they related or not related?
Yeah, VO Booth Camp is my new content channel, which is effectively a direct line of inspiration, coaching, tips, best practices on how to get into voiceover work.
New channel. Is that a YouTube thing?
That is a YouTube thing. Yeah, it's exclusively YouTube, and I'll send you a link for it.
Sure.
And it's something that I just started a couple weeks ago, because in my time on Reddit and in a few other places, I've gotten in touch with a lot of people, or a lot of people have gotten in touch with me, asking me questions because they just want somebody to ask a question to, and it could be a simple question, and so many of these questions are, which mic should I buy, or a bunch of hyper technical things. My answer is always the same: whatever mic you can afford, get something and start. I started with a piece of junk and did a national advertisement. It's not about the technology. It's about you starting the process.
They're cheap enough now that pretty much anything you get within reason is going to sound fine. I'm
talking on $100 mic.
Yeah, right.
And so the VO Booth Camp is a way for people to get both these little concise answers. I really aim to have these videos be no more than about 10 minutes tops, and see a piece of gear that I use and how it's applicable, or get some advice on, like the one that I just put up today, was about finding your niche in voiceover work. Because it's a big question. Where should I be pitching myself? Should I be exclusively audiobooks? Should I be trying for YouTube video voiceover, things like that? Everybody's always concerned about what my niche is. And for me, at the end of the day, as I say in the video, don't worry about finding your niche. Throw your net far and wide, because the niche will find you. And that is established by who hired you? What are they doing? Well, apparently they thought that your voice fit their niche. So analyzing where you're actually getting traction and then leaning into that area is probably wise. But, it's a simple little content offering. And it also allows me, I am a video editor, and we used to do a podcast that was fully produced 5-camera video. And we hung that up because it was way more work than I could afford to do. But I missed video editing, and so I decided to offer up a video channel as well that was a complement to both the book and my coaching.
Before I lose track of the book, where can people find the book?
They will be able to find the book at both Amazon and Audible.
Okay, that answers my question. Yeah, I was looking for it this morning and I couldn't find it anywhere, so I wanted to make sure.
It's in the home stretch, and I've said that about 9 times in the past 6 months.
Yeah.
We just finished formatting and layout, and it's going to be ebook and audiobook.
Awesome.
And it'll be available on Amazon, and it'll also be available, the links will be available at the website for the book, which is The Quick and Dirty, all words, not a sign, thequickanddirty.guide.
Do you have a particular show or host that you look up to in any way when you're creating your podcast that you're trying to emulate? And initially, I write this question from the perspective of podcasts, but I know you have a deep affection for talk radio and radio programs of the past. So, feel free to include some of your a radio host in there if you'd like. But who are you looking up to or trying to emulate, if anyone at all?
Sure. Yeah. And I guess I'll bifurcate this answer a little bit in that, again, I grew up on radio. And when it comes to announcers, I could list a ton of people that nobody outside of southeastern Wisconsin had ever heard of.
Yeah, I guess that was the era when radio was truly a local thing.
It was. Yeah, it absolutely was. And, I'll give a shout out to anybody in Wisconsin who's listening, who's of my age, who's like a Gen X person, was ever into jazz. There was a gentleman that was a jazz DJ, and his slot was always overnight. And his name was Ron Cuzner. He had an extraordinarily unique voice and a unique delivery. And his show was called The Dark Side. And it was on from midnight until 6 a.m. And he would come on and, "This has been The Dark Side of Friday, the 9th of January." But his voice was grating. But his passion for being on the mic and having a direct, intimate connection between he and the listener was inspiring. And it set a model for me. Now, my approach to broadcasting, and I did some time on air back in the day in college radio. My approach to broadcasting is wildly different from him. But the thing that I did take away from Ron Cuzner was you can establish a real, true, significant, intimate relationship with your listener. And that really has informed a lot of the things that I've done in the recent past. When it comes to other broadcasters, for as much as I have had trouble with Howard Stern, I have a deep respect for Howard Stern.
He's kind of a legend.
Yeah, he's a legend, and he's another one of these voices that have really established the model that we go by. His ability to do an interview for whomever he's talking to, be it a porn star or a movie star, his ability to have a real substantial interview where you're not shying away from, everybody knows that if Howard wants an answer out of you, Howard is going to beat you down until you give him the answer. But over the years, Stern himself has even softened, and he's moved away from the shock jock thing, and he's gotten to a place where I have a lot better experience listening to him now because he's being more genuine. He's less concerned about, and a lot of this has to do with his move off of terrestrial radio and, onto satellite, where he's got more room and he doesn't have the constraints and he doesn't really have to worry about, what the network bosses will think. And it was interesting that his, for lack of a better term, his softening of approach happened in the last 10 or 12, 15 years, even after the controls had been taken off of him. And I think that's just Howard maturing to the point where he goes, maybe I got something more to say aside from Baba Booey. And I really appreciated being witness to that change in Stern. When it comes to podcasters, podcasting and broadcasting are now so closely related that it's hard to tell the two apart. I will always go and defer to really what I think is the granddaddy of podcasts, which isn't what most people think. They're going to think I'm going to say Joe Rogan or something like that. Honestly, I feel that the birth of podcast happened because of Ira Glass and This American Life.
Yeah.
Because that intimate approach to storytelling, and not only storytelling, I like to say it less storytelling and more story revealing. That's what This American Life did for broadcast. Letting people in, trusting that people have an hour's worth of attention span for something that's subtle, that's intimate, that takes time to lay out there for the listener, and trust that the listener is going to come along for the ride. And one of the first broadcast radio shows that was repurposed as a podcast was This American Life. I remember when NPR essentially took the floodgates off and put every episode, every back episode, they were already 10, 15 years in, and put all the This American Life episodes up as podcasts.
I had never listened to This American Life on the radio, or I don't know that I've ever actually listened to NPR on the radio, but This American Life as a podcast is one that I try to listen to almost every week. And there's a number of NPR shows that I listen to as podcasts that are fantastic. Planet Money and All Things Considered.
There are so many of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of them, and they're great. I can totally see how you would say that, that is the beginning, I guess, of podcasting would be those types of radio shows, which, the crossover there between podcasting and broadcasting definitely is prevalent.
Yeah, that line gets just smushed. Yeah, there's no real difference. And that really was also, by way of content creation, that was an important landmark as well, because it showed that large terrestrial broadcast networks can repurpose their content immediately by making it be more portable, more flexible by way of listening time. It's what everybody wanted from radio. There's a joke.
Radio on demand.
Exactly. And there's a joke that NPR uses. They have a little phrase called a driveway moment. And a driveway moment is when you're coming home from your commute, listening to a show on NPR, and it's so good, and you want to get to the end of the segment, but you just pulled into your driveway. And so you sit in your car for the next 12 minutes so that you can finish listening to it. And the driveway moment has kind of been, I don't know, it's been a little bit defeated because now you don't have to worry about that. You can just hit pause on whatever, content streaming platform you're listening to it on and go inside and then Bluetooth it to your speakers in your house and finish listening in the comfort of your home.
And then queue up the next episode.
Exactly right. Yeah. And I think that that's a wonderful thing to have happened because it makes content more available and more relevant to more people, which at the end of the day is what a broadcaster wants. They don't want you to go away. They want you to finish the content because that's going to compel you to follow the content in the future. It's kind of what radio always wanted to be, but couldn't due to technology. And other broadcasters to be more dedicated to podcasting. I listened to Joe Rogan for a while, and in many ways, I have respect for what he built.
King of podcast controversy right now.
Yeah, boy, is he, man. He stepped in it good. Well, I shouldn't say that. What I'll say is it actually caught up with him.
Yeah.
Because what he's really being hit on now is past behavior.
Right.
And I'm not here to judge people's behavior. I'm just saying that I listened to Joe because of the guests. He did have an ability to bring in very compelling people, and that's the thing that's unarguable about Rogan is fine. You look at all the hunters and boxers and MMA people that he's had on his show. That's fine. But there's also been people like Brian Cox, the astrophysicists, Brian Greene, the string theorists, Neil deGrasse Tyson, on and on and on. He's had some really compelling people on. And I, as a listener, I enjoy hearing a curious person investigating something that they don't know well, but want to know more of, and asking questions of an expert. That I find very rewarding content and very entertaining. I'm a big backer of whom I think is the other titan of the beginnings of podcasting, and that's Mark Maron.
Yep. WTF with Mark Maron.
Exactly. And what I really like about Mark's approach is he leaves the ugly dirt in. When things are uncomfortable, he doesn't edit that away. He lets you see his humanity as a person, which often gets dialed back when you're doing a podcast. You want to come across as unflappable and completely professional and very polished. And Mark is there to be Mark. And his work is as much self-analysis and self-improvement live on mic. And I like that, and I respect that. And over my time of, being a WTF listener, hearing him go through his trials and travails and hearing him struggle with, or his own perception of struggle in his career and things, I find that to be a comfort. We're in this together. And, you can say what you want about Joe Rogan and all the, famous people he's had on his podcast. Mark Maron had the sitting president of the United States in his garage with him, with snipers on the roofs of the houses across the street.
Yeah.
And I think what Maron has done, I think at times it goes unheralded. He deserves a lot of credit for showing the world that this is a very viable way to inform and entertain people. And you can do it professionally with a little bit of polish, but you don't have to fake yourself and you don't have to step away from your humanity. And I have a deep amount of respect for that.
Good company to be part of. I'd like to transition a little bit and talk about your podcast now. So why did you start your podcast, and where does the name Keep Your Hat On come from?
Well, I'll start with the last question first. So one of the other content producers that I follow quite regularly is Adam Savage, who used to be on Mythbusters.
Yep.
And, after Mythbusters ended, he started up, he started it a little bit before, him and Jamie Heineman, started a content channel called Tested. And I'm a former machinist, and I build things. I have a shop outside my studio here, and I build things of questionable utility and, that kind of thing. And so I enjoy watching people make things or build things. And in one of his content offerings, I believe it was when he was still doing his podcast, which has been out of production now for about 3 years or so, he brought up a memory that he had that coincides with a memory that I had, and it reawoke this memory. I'm a big, big fan of the late author Kurt Vonnegut. And Adam retold this story that I had forgotten I'd heard, where Vonnegut was asked what his favorite dirty joke was. And Vonnegut said, I can't remember the setup, but the punchline was, keep your hat on. We may end up miles from here. And I had been searching at that time. This was the beginning of the pandemic. And of course, everybody's busy freaking out and washing their groceries with bleach. And I went, you know what? I had engineered a number of podcasts for clients of mine. And I was like, I should really throw down. This is the time to start doing this. And I had attempted a few other offerings that were kind of like podcasts, but they were just me talking, and I didn't find it particularly compelling. And I just said, you know what? I treated it like I treated my voiceover career. And I went, it's just time to do this thing and start. And if I fall on my face, no harm, no foul. So my business partner, I said, look, I'm going to do this thing. I want you involved because I need another voice. And then I went, you know what would be good? It would be good if the announcer of it wasn't me. One of the people that I used to work with in the arts has an absolutely phenomenal voice. And I'd always been bugging them to get into voiceover work. And again, it was that thing of, well, I don't know how, I don't have the right stuff, blah, blah. And I was like...
This is Michael, the announcer?
This is Michael, our announcer, Mr. Okay. Bramage. And I just said, Michael, you're doing this with me. I'm sending you down a microphone kit. And thanks, Amazon. And I got him down there. I was like, it's time for you to start doing this. I'll walk you through it. I'll hold your hand. We're just doing this for fun, but you'll get something out of it. And another one of my friends I brought in to it as well, my friend Ty, or Robert. And I said, we're doing this thing. Come do this thing with us. I know that you've been interested in audio production for a long time, and let's do this. And we did the first episode, and it went well. But then I'm still in touch. I'm very close friends with my former philosophy. My background's philosophy. I was a philosophy major in college, which is really employable, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
But
big market.
I got a hold of my old philosophy professor, and I said, Dr. Peterson, I'm doing this thing. Come on the show. And he came on the second episode, and he's been there since. And the show is called Keep Your Hat On, and really that's kind of the ethos of the show. It's four people getting together, talking about whatever, and we have no idea where we're going to end up. We always start with good intentions of trying to make a short episode and stay on topic, and it never works. It never, ever works. But we're into the third season. Our seasons are about a half a year long, between 10 and 12 episodes a season. And yeah, it's really, our goal is to, as I said before we started recording, our goal is to just give people a place to come and listen to guys who are aware of their privilege, are aware of their place in the world, and are trying to be better human beings. And explore topics that we either find interesting or that we find relevant and salient to the cultural conversation that we're having now.
So your hosts you have three co-hosts with yourself. So yourself, Andrew Scott, Chris Vacano, Robert Anthony, Dr. Mark Peterson, and then you have Michael, the announcer. He's part of the show, but not really part of the show.
He is part of the show. He's actually a big part of the show because... one of the things that I kind of wanted to emulate was that morning zoo radio show that we all woke up with on FM radio as we were getting ready to go to class. I wanted to present, and most of this is very tongue-in-cheek. We have decently high production values.
You do, yeah.
And I wanted to make it feel like... This is going to be a reference that some people are going to get and other people won't, and so I apologize for those who don't. I kind of wanted to make it feel a little bit like Fernwood Tonight. The comical interview show that wasn't really an interview show. It was done as a send-up of that whole talking head interview style show.
I'll pretend that I'm one of the people that gets that reference.
Right. It's a rather obscure television offering, but I wanted the show to appear like it's trying to be bigger than it is. And, what lends immediate credibility to any production is some huge base
some voiceover at the beginning.
Sonorous voice, yeah. You know, and I'll cop to the fact that in other productions, I'm that voice, you know, but I didn't want it to be my voice. I wanted it to have that weight that outside voice presents. But at the same time, you know, when Michael and I are working together and I'm coming up with ideas of things to say that, you know, and I have Michael record the voiceover for the episode after the episode has been recorded, so I can give him reference points of things to say for it. And I have him say some of the most absurd stuff there is. He has this incredible voice. And then to hear him swearing like a sailor is this, you know, kind of, it's very, you know, this awkward feeling. And I find it funny, and our listeners have mentioned that they thoroughly enjoy that. And sometimes we'll use something. Michael will send me this big, long take where he's riffing on these ideas. And there's been a few times where I've taken some of the things that I didn't use in the intro of the show that were just these nuggets of hilarity, and I'll Easter egg them in the back end of the episode. Because that's the kind of production I like. I like things that are very self-referential and often break the fourth wall. Yeah, we've had a lot of fun with it. And there's for people who are listening to your podcast, I really encourage you to jump in and listen to ours, because
absolutely.
Our announcer Michael is going on an adventure, and we're fully ready to exploit his adventure for our own our laughs.
One of the things that he says in the intro of your podcast is a podcast by 3 nerdy nobodies and 1 nerdy kind of somebody. So who's the nerdy kind of somebody?
Oh, I would have to give that to Dr. Mark Peterson. One of us has got a PhD behind their names, and so he's a little bit more of a somebody than we are.
Fair enough. The first couple episodes, I think I finally caught one where he was on. The last couple episodes that I listened to, has not been present. But
he's not been present. He's been busy.
Cool. I think I know the answer to this, but do you all record in person or no?
No, we don't.
No. So I know you have a Rode Procaster. Or no, not a Procaster. You have
I have a Rode. I'm a fan of Rode products, but only because of their utility, not because of their brand name. I have a Rodecaster Pro, which is the recording deck, and that serves a number of different it does a number of different things in my studio. But really, we all record remotely. Me, Robert, who's also, and I'll take this opportunity to explain. I've never explained why I refer to Robert on the podcast often as Ty.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Okay, well, I beat you to the punch. Robert and I we met each other through, we're both practitioners of Soto Zen Buddhism. And Robert, his formal Buddhist name is Taijitsu. And I just shorthand him as Ty. But I've never explained that on the podcast. That's just one of those things where I think it's actually a little bit funnier that I didn't give an explanation for that. But he's got the three of us have Rode pod mics that we use, and we're all, you know, simply straight into our systems between the pod mic, and I think we all have Scarletts at this point, Focusrite Scarletts.
Yep. And
Dr. Peterson, I sent him, he's got a nice Blue Yeti. We'll be upgrading him once he gets settled into his new place. We'll be getting him a broadcast, a dynamic mic like we have to equate sound, but we all record remotely. We use an online recording service that allows us to see each other. Initially, we did the podcast, we did Keep Your Hat On as a fully produced 5-camera show on YouTube. And we love doing it. I'm very happy with the way it turned out, the way it looks. We still get some traction. People go and watch those episodes because, you know, one of the offerings that I have as a content creator is video editing and production. And what better way to demonstrate that than by doing a very high quality show? You know, we didn't do streaming capture then. We were all shooting in high resolution 1080p locally and then editing all that together. So I wanted to present something that looked more like a television show and not just a Zoom gathering, where everybody's, I call that the Brady Bunch look, where everybody's stacked on top of each other. Our stuff is all camera 1, camera 2, cuts, transitions, things like that. And it looked great.
Were you using OBS for that or something else?
No. Actually, what we were doing was we were recording, all of us minus Dr. Peterson were recording locally on our phones at 30 frames per second.
And then you're just manually editing it?
Yep.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And yeah, it was a beast. It was, each episode took me about 4 days to produce. Because we would get 2 hours worth of recording that I would have to edit down. And then, we were doing inserts and visual stingers and transitions and, PSA spots and things like that. And it looked very glossy, and I'm still very proud of it. But I just didn't have 8 days a month to devote to something like that. It was starting to impede the rest of my business, and I was falling behind on audiobook projects, and it was just, so we decided that we had faces for radio.
Yep.
And we just, transitioned over to where we still have our episodes up and available on YouTube, because interestingly, YouTube is the #1 platform in the world for podcasts.
It's also a huge search engine.
It is the largest search engine on Earth. 1/4 of the population of the planet uses YouTube every day. And so, we just put a redundant copy up with a little bit of video treatment on YouTube, but have really just transitioned it over to, being a traditional podcast. And to get all the way back to your original question, the reason why we decided to do the podcast was because I was losing my mind. I was in lockdown and couldn't see my friends. The good news is I'm a pretty hardcore introvert, so it wasn't as much of a lift for me as it was for other people. But really, after about episode 5, all of the participants of the show went, you know what? The world is on fire, but every time we do this, I feel better. And so we're just like, that's reason enough to keep doing this. And if people jump in and listen, great. If they don't, at least I got to hang out with my friends for 2 hours.
That's a little bit why I started this podcast. As soon as the pandemic hit, I transitioned to a work from home role, and I haven't gone into the office, but maybe a couple times. And usually when I go in there, there's nobody there.
Right.
So, we have been seeing our friends. We haven't been nearly as isolated as we were maybe in 2020 this year, but reaching out to new people and speaking with other podcast creators such as yourself and such as the other people that I've had on this podcast has been honestly one of the more fulfilling things that I've been doing over the last 4 or 5, 6 months. And it shouldn't really surprise me, but having that connection with somebody, even if it's just for an hour, hour and a half, has been really invigorating.
It reminds you that the world is bigger than just the room you're sitting in.
Yeah, and then the people that you connect with on a daily basis. There's more people out there.
Exactly. And I think you're right in that, you and I are doing this not in no small part because we're suffering through a pandemic. And we went and we were looking for alternative channels of communication. I was not on Reddit until the pandemic. Yeah. I realized that I needed another avenue to be able to communicate to people with. And so that's how you and I connected. And that's why we're having this conversation. And I think if there was a message that I've been carrying through my media throughout this pandemic, it's that, yes, we're all suffering through this. But remember, there are ways where you can be connected and stay connected. And not only stay connected, but make new connections that you might not have done if not for the fact that we are all having to deal with this.
Yeah.
And personally, my world, interestingly, has kind of expanded because of this situation. I'm in touch with more people. I've got more clients that I'm working for. I've met more friends. I'm coaching more people. And it's all because of where we find ourselves. Do I want us to stay here? No. But what I really want us to do is all row in the same direction so that when we come out of this, everybody is more connected than when we started. And if that's a byproduct of a terrible experience that we all have to go through, that's a ray of sunshine, and I want rays of sunshine.
Yeah, it'd be great if that's the way that it works out.
Well, it's for people like us to make sure that that happens.
On your podcast, I think during the outro, maybe you have a segment or a piece of speech where you're like, this podcast is part of the Narrowband Broadcast Network. This podcast is part of Pod Squad PDX. What are these things? Are these platforms that you're on or that you own?
These are, well, let's go back and talk about that form that I wanted the podcast to be. I wanted it to sound like a broadcast offering, a classical broadcast offering. And if you think about listening to a big radio show or watching a big television show, they'll always have who brought this to you by. Mm-hmm. And, or if you're listening to radio, this is a Shamrock Communications production or whatever brand name you want to use. Those things are acoustically or audio characteristics of a big production. And I'm not saying that we are a big production. I felt a comedy lean towards making this show feel bigger than it is. And then you get in through all this gloss and it's just a bunch of dummies talking. But at the same time, before the podcast was live, as a new business venture, I was getting ready to go produce podcasts for companies in person. Showing up with the gear, setting up so that a company could do a podcast and have nothing to do but put people in a conference room. I'd record the podcast, produce the podcast, deploy the podcast. And I was setting that up in October of 19. And we all know what happened next.
Yeah.
So this idea of getting out into the world and having this be a business offering of mine got shelved. I had registered a domain called Pod Squad PDX, which was what I was going to use as the brand of the offering. But that really couldn't happen. But I started producing podcasts remotely for somebody else. And that's the name of the company, the name of the offering that I use for that. At the same time, I wanted to start developing my own content. And really, I like the idea. One of the things that podcasts offer that's kind of baked right in is it gives voice to smaller groups, very niche offerings. Again, go come up with some wacky niche, search for it and add the word podcast. And there's somebody out in the world that is doing a podcast about that thing. It could be, paper napkin origami. There's a podcast for it. Viking shoe tying. There's a podcast for it.
And if you make those podcasts, let me know. And you can be my next guest on Who Makes a Podcast.
I will pat you on the back for making that be a really good tie-in. But this idea of a very narrow focus, I like the idea of people with disparate passions being able to find a media offering that is right in their niche, a very narrow focus. And that led me to the idea of the Narrowband Broadcast Network. What I want to do as a producer of podcasts for other people is give them an opportunity. Maybe they don't have the technical know-how. Maybe they need help and advisement in content creation or engineering or production. But I want them to get their message out. I don't care if you're talking about, your specific niche is making Fabergé eggs out of Legos. If you've got somebody that wants to hear that, I want to help you get that out. And so this idea of narrowband broadcasting, very focused. And that's what our slug line is for that offering. The focus is on you, what you want to say, the information you're passionate about. And so as offerings to the world through my business, those are two viable entities. Pod Squad PDX is really based on getting people in the Portland metro area. And by the way, PDX is how we here refer to Portland, PDX, because it's the airport code. Portland International Airport's airport code is PDX. If you're here local in town, when the pandemic is done, come talk to me. But narrowband is the real heavy brand that I push, and that is my ability to help other people produce, engineer, put polish on their podcast and get it out into the world, even if you don't know thing one about podcasting.
Cool. What does typical production look like for one of your episodes, say? So from your mouth to the listener's ears, what are you doing as far as what steps you're taking and how you're putting the show together?
Okay, the first thing is make coffee.
Check.
Right? Our production has streamlined quite a bit over the course of our history with Keep Your Hat On. Again, we at first were starting with video. We were leading with video. And so that necessitated a lot of lighting. You know, every one of us has got ring lights, fill lights, key lights. But, you know, we would get our phones set up and all that. There were many moving parts. That all fell away, and it made the rest of the lift a lot easier. Now our standard procedure is I have a checklist of things in front of me on my wall. That's a pre-show rundown for me.
So what does that look like? What's included on that?
Everything that you'd think. Check my mic. Make sure I'm not having a significant amount of line noise. I'm in a converted, we have a 2-car garage. One half of it is my studio. And I'm not in a garage. It's a room within the garage.
Yep.
I hope the city doesn't hear this because it's a totally illegally built room, but it predated us. So
can you show a permit for that?
Shh. Don't say that. We bought the house with it in there, so we aren't responsible. But we got some dicey electricity in here. This room is not grounded, so there are times when I have noise. So I have to. I check for line noise. The rest of the production is we've got it dialed down to where we're all pretty aware of how we jump in. We do mic checks, line checks. We make sure that the big one is, and I still have to beat one of my participants over the head about this. You know, things like shut all your phone notifications off, even your vibrators, because, you know, you have your mic attached to your desk and your phone vibrates and it suddenly sounds like you got a jackhammer in the room with you. Everything else is pretty much what we want to talk about, and we're very loosey-goosey about it. Normally, somebody will bring in a topic that they feel they want to address, and sometimes we research it. Sometimes we let the person interested in it be the expert, and the rest of us jump in with either opinions or things we know. And we do really try to be organic about how we present the show. That's kind of the hook. We don't know where we're going to wind up. And that's served us both well and been an absolute terrible passenger in the car with us as well, because there have been times where, you know, we're like, I got nothing. You got nothing? We got nothing. And then we talk for 2 hours and I have to edit down a 2-hour, 4-part conversation. and that's no small feat.
No.
But yeah, as far as the technical goes, and this is one of the things I do want to encourage your listeners to understand, the technical barriers to podcasting are less than you think they are. They really are. It's the doing of the thing. Get in there, record yourself talking to somebody, and learn along the way. And the internet is all the resource you need. Come join, you and me on Reddit and ask questions, or get a hold of somebody like me who's willing to cut you some time and answer some questions for you. Everything else, as far as our production goes, is really we're based on personality. We're 4 very different people, 4 very different backgrounds, trying to find ways to be good people and use our brains and not fall for a bunch of garbage that the rest of the world says is important, and bring up things that we find important. Those are the kind of voices that I support. People who have something to say, but maybe don't have the vehicle to say it.
And your co-hosts, I think I have this right, did not know each other before you started, right?
Nope, exactly. They were all my friends, but hadn't met each other.
Did you have any trouble convincing them to do this with you?
None. Absolutely none at all. And I think part of that really also has to do with the pandemic. Again, I've known Dr. Peterson for over 30 years. There is no good reason why I should have stayed in touch with him except for the fact that we were buddies, and he took me under his wing when I was a freshman in college and was my academic mentor. And I'd always wanted to find something to do to bring Peterson in. He's a brilliant man. He's hilarious, completely and utterly inappropriate at times when decorum is called for, which is, generally speaking, what I think the world needs more of. But he's a truly great intellect, and he's somebody that I've respected as an academic and as a writer. Everybody else, my partner Chris, who is my business partner, is my current life partner's ex-husband, and he lives down the street, and he's part of my COVID bubble. He and I decided, because he's a content creator as well. He's a web designer by trade. That's his business. And, generally speaking, when you see graphics, the thumbnails for our show on YouTube, those are done by him. He and I we share a bunch of business and clients. And my buddy Robert is somebody that I've known for, it's got to be about 15, 16 years now. And he and I are in the same Zen practice group, the Zen community of Oregon. I knew that he was very interested in audio production and Ty's an interesting guy with interesting views. And I just said to everybody, look, I'm doing this thing. Come do this thing. Try this thing. And if you like this thing, come back and do the thing again. And that's pretty much how I crashed them all together. Nobody knew anybody until the first day we did it. And we've been doing it now for a year.
It's awesome that it worked out so well.
Yeah, it really did. And we look forward to doing it. Even if we think we don't look forward to doing it, as soon as we start doing a session again, we all start loosening up and feeling a little better.
What do you see for the future of your podcast? What are you hoping for? And then more broadly, where do you see podcasts going?
Well, for us, I've said this on the show a number of times, and I genuinely mean this, not in a disparaging way. I don't care if people listen. We're really doing that show for us and our mental health. And it's paid us back in that way. We've all said to one degree or another, I feel better having done this. And so we're going to keep doing it, and we're really letting it grow organically. And I know that that's kind of a beat to death term, but it really is where I am with it.
Yeah, it's the truth most of the time.
Yeah, and you know very well that there are a lot of options to try to get your podcast out there in front of people, from paid SEO rankings to paying somebody to do social media for you and buying likes and things. I don't want to be disingenuous. If anything, one of our main tent poles of our podcast is we're being genuine with you. We are genuine people saying genuine things, and we don't want to do that, pay people to like us. Man, that just makes me itch.
Yeah. So
we're letting it be what it is. Doesn't mean that I don't do social media. You can follow the Keep Your Hat On podcast on most of the social, or all the major social medias, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and we have our website, kyhopodcast.com, and we're just letting it do its thing and letting it grow. And if people join in with us, that's awesome. And if people don't, that's okay too. It's really all right with us. But we do have an eye towards growth because we think that we offer something that other people don't. Now, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of podcasts of dudes sitting around talking. But there's not a whole lot of podcasts of four middle-aged guys sitting around talking and being aware of the fact that they're white, privileged, middle-aged, and in a place where they can take the time to look at all those things and analyze them and see maybe where they can't improve, maybe where they can change their approach to be more sympathetic with different people or aware of people's suffering that they themselves don't have to experience because they're four white cishet males to one degree or another. And I think that that's valuable. And I think that that contributes to the cultural conversation. Where I see podcasting going in the future is less of where podcasting is going and more of where traditional terrestrial broadcasting is going.
Okay.
Terrestrial broadcast is scared right now. They're losing listenership at a rate that we have not seen in the history of broadcasting. Up until 2010 or so, broadcast had not only been king, but had seen consistent growth since like Marconi, since the radio became a thing. And it's starting to slide now in all areas of broadcast. I mean, how much YouTube do you watch versus how much TV do you watch? How much Netflix?
Yeah, the on-demand aspect is alluring for sure.
It's not only alluring, it's valuable. It's marketable. It's a hook. You can pause this. You can come back to it at your convenience. And that combined with my leaning into this idea of narrow band broadcasting, of don't worry about how many people are going to listen to you. If somebody wants to listen and you've got something to say, your voice is as valuable as Howard Stern's. Your voice is as valuable as Joe Rogan, because somebody out there wants to hear you. And so this tight focus of topic combined with the ability to get it out into the wider world is an incredibly powerful thing. And so I see podcasting, one of the things that's happening right now is terrestrial radio has gotten on board. Whether or not they wanted to get on board is one thing. They are on board now. And so, like you and I were talking, how many shows from NPR are immediately repurposed as podcasts? And not only repurposed, how many dedicated podcasts are large networks doing now? They're all trying to elbow their way in because they realize that people like Maron and Rogan, Rogan just got bought by Spotify for $100 million. Now, whether or not that was a wise business investment is a different discussion. But this is a real and viable industry. And not only is it a real and viable industry, it's one that the individual can get in on. And you're seeing all sorts of people getting into the business that wouldn't have had the opportunity before. Not only little people, but, Dak Shepard.
Yeah.
And whether or not you like his podcast is not truly relevant.
I used to listen to it before it went Spotify exclusive, but...
Yeah, well, and see, you just brought up something that's interesting to me from an industry perspective, and that's this idea of platform exclusivity. Somebody asked me the other day on Reddit, if they ponied up $10 million, would you go exclusive on your podcast?
I saw that thread as well.
Look, the broke broadcaster in me goes, hell yeah.
Yep.
But the other part of me immediately flinched.
Yeah.
And I see the argument there, and I think the argument's valid.
I think I commented I would have to know what the terms are.
Well, of course, yeah. But I like this idea of independence. When I was growing up as a kid, I used to have a base station CB radio, a desktop CB radio, and an aerial on the top of my house. And I could broadcast myself talking with other people for, 10 miles. And I set up my own little, back then, illegal, don't listen, FCC, I hope you're not tuning into this right now. I broadcast music because I like the idea of being heard, not from an ego place, from a, hey, I can do this too place. And I can have fun with this too. And I want to see more people doing this. I believe in the embarrassment of riches. I believe in the giant restaurant menu that allows you to choose from 80 different things. Because you're going to find something that's suited just for you. And when you do that, when you find a broadcaster or a content creator that you really jibe with, it feels magical. you really feel like your world has expanded a little bit, but at the same time, you've got a connection to something that almost feels like it was made just for you. And that's a fantastic feeling. And that's what makes me harken back nostalgically to being a young kid listening to the radio at 2 o'clock in the morning and hearing that guy say something, and you learn something, and it broadens your perspective and it changes your life in a tiny way. But it might be a tiny way that lasts the rest of your life. And that's what podcasting is doing now. And I only see it growing. I only see people becoming more creative. The big thing that's happening now, and I know you know this, Chris, is the resurgence of the audio drama, where people are doing full cast recordings of things, and they're creating their own 10, 12, 14, 20 episode arc of story. And it's fantastic. This goes back to radio dramas of the 30s and 40s.
The War of the Worlds.
Exactly. The War of the Worlds and The Shadow Knows. And, you know, a lot of it's happening in horror. Horror is really getting a lot of traction in the, you know, paranormal and all that is getting a lot of traction in the online streaming story world. And I think that's great, because what creativity and stories are we hearing now that would have been kept quiet were not for the rise of the podcast and the ability for people to independently produce these things? For me, more is better. More choice is better. More offerings are better, because there's going to be somebody in this industry, in this podcasting industry, that 20 years from now will be a huge name and will say, I got my start because of podcasting. And what would have happened were that not to have happened? That voice, that story, that thing that we all culturally refer to might not have happened. And so that's what gets me excited about the whole industry.
I think that's a fantastic place to leave this. Andrew, I've had a ton of fun talking to you. This has been a really insightful episode for myself and for my listeners. I know you said that your podcast is on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and your website, and we'll have all of those links in my show notes. Is there anywhere else that you want to send people that they can connect with you?
I think the best place to do it, if anybody has any questions, they can email me directly. They can email Andrew at andrewscottmedia.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions. But yeah, jump in, follow, come hang out on the podcast, send us questions. You can always participate in the podcast at sending an email to talkback at kyhopodcast.com. You can tell I talk for a living because I just screwed up my own brand name. But yeah, just I'm happy to interface with anybody who's got a question. But Chris, it's been an absolute treat to talk to you as well. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You bet.
That was my conversation with Andrew Scott, multimedia nerd, content creator, professional voice actor, and producer of the Keep Your Hat On podcast, which can be found on all of the major podcast networks. You can also find Andrew at kyhopodcast.com, on Instagram at kyhopodcast, and on Twitter at the kyhopodcast. My name is Chris Cookley, and you can find me at whomakesapodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, it would be an enormous help if you shared it with your friends or left a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. It really does make a difference. And if you host a podcast and would like to be my next guest on Who Makes a Podcast, let me know. Go to whomakesapodcast.com/guest and tell me about your show. This is Who Makes a Podcast. I'll be back next time with another conversation with another incredible podcast host. Thanks for listening.